Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and today I want to talk about language learning goals, and in particular, SMART goals. And SMART goals are basically just a framework for creating goals, and it's really awesome in terms of using it for creating language learning goals, but really anything in general. And basically, what SMART goals are basically kind of five main attributes that you want your goals to have. And so I've kind of listed them right here. So that means that your goals should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time related. So, you might have seen SMART goals before, and there are kind of different use cases of SMART goals. You might have seen it kind of in a more corporate environment or using different words to describe each of the letters. But we're really going to just kind of take these main words to kind of just and apply that to creating really effective language learning goals. And I'm going to go over each of the categories. And I think that it's a great way to get started with creating goals for yourself. Because, if you really want to make a lot of progress in the long term, you definitely want to be creating goals and tracking those goals. And so, if you're going to go take the time and effort to go create goals, I think that using something like the SMART goals framework can be really helpful for you in the end of the day. And so, with that said, let's go ahead and get started and tackle the first category here, which is the S for specific. So the first thing in the SMART goals framework is S for specific. And I think this is something that a lot of people aren't doing a lot when they create language learning goals. They're very broad in a lot of cases. They're not specific, and it's a big mistake in the end of the day. And I think that if you have very specific goals and you know exactly what it means to achieve that goal, what the goal involves in terms of your time investment and what you need to do, you're going to overall get a lot better results and have a lot more effectiveness out of your goals versus kind of a very broad, open-ended goal. So, like something to ask yourself is like, what is my actual end goal? And for a lot of people, it's something like fluency. And what does that mean to me? And it's going to mean different things to different people, right? Some people really want to reach a very high competency level in a language. Others kind of want something that's a little bit just kind of at a lower stage. And it's very important to identify what that end state goal is because it's going to inform what your other goals are. And if we don't know exactly what we're aiming for, it's really hard to be very specific. So I think the first thing is to really be very clear about what that end state goal or fluency or whatever it is means to you. And from there, we can kind of get down into the specifics on how do we actually achieve that end state goal. And I think that a lot of people will set a goal of fluency, and maybe that means a high level of competency. That means that I know this many words or I've studied for this long, but that's where the specificity just ends. And you really want to try to create goals that are very specific in terms of helping you to get to that end state goal, whether that's fluency, a certain skill level, or whatever that is. It shouldn't just be, I'm going to learn the language every single week, or I'm going to try to study daily each morning. Like that's very broad. That's not very specific. We want to be very specific when we're creating goals. And so, if you want some things that you could be specific about, think things like the amount of time that you spend learning a language daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly, ideally in like an hours total or minutes total. So, rather than just saying I'm going to study languages every week, create a goal like I'm going to study 3 hours every single week. And you can even be even more specific than that. You could say something along the lines of, I'm going to study 3 hours every single week, and I'm going to at least do 15 minutes every single day, right? Being as specific as possible is going to be very helpful for you kind of making sure that you're getting constant progress and constant results as you go about learning a language. You can also do this with things like how many words do you want to learn every single day, week, month, or year, right? Don't just say something like I'm going to use Anki every day, right? Try to set a target, whether that's the words that you want to learn each day or whatever it is. It could also be things like I will listen to language learning when I'm getting ready for the day every single morning, right? Rather than kind of committing to listening to a language every week, right? Be specific about what that actually means. When are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? Be very specific. Think things like too, like rather than just saying I'm going to watch a Netflix show in a foreign language, be like I'm going to watch this entire series by the end of the month, and because there's 12 episodes, I'm going to do 3 episodes every single week, and I'll do that on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Or say stuff like, I will have a conversation in my target language every weekend for 1 hour versus I'm going to try to fit that in. You want to get away from that cloudiness aspect. You want to be very specific. The other thing that you could be very specific on is, what skills do you need to work on and how will you go about working on those skills, right? Rather than just saying like I'm going to work on my grammar, ask yourself, okay, well, how is it that I'm actually going to work on grammar? Do I need a grammar book? Do I have the resources I need right now to go do that? So the more detailed you can be in terms of how you're going to do it, and being specific about what that goal means, the better in the end of the day. And I think a lot of people really aren't very specific with the goals that they do create. So first things first, if you're going to create language learning goals, try to be as specific as you possibly can. So the next category is M for measurable. And you really want your goals to be measurable if you can. And this is why I'm a huge advocate for tracking your goals, tracking your progress. And tracking your goals and tracking your overall progress is very huge in language learning. And I think it's really important because learning a language takes a long time, and in a lot of ways, it's very hard to measure your progress. And so, any way that you can kind of measure your overall actions, measure your overall results, will kind of help you to stay motivated or to kind of reinforce the fact that, yes, I am improving, I am putting in action and effort, even when I might be facing a plateau or be feeling a little discouraged, because it's hard to know, like, how well do you know grammar? How well are you, or how good are you at speaking, right? But when you're measuring things and you have that in your goals and you're tracking it, it's going to help you to overcome a lot of those obstacles. So some things that you could measure in terms of having language learning goals would be something like hours spent learning the language daily, weekly, or monthly, right? That's something that you can clearly measure, is how much time investment you put into learning a language. Something else could be the words that you have learned every single week or month or whatever. And with SRS flashcard systems, that's really easy because there's kind of inbuilt tracking in there. You could also track these words yourself. Maybe another app like Duolingo or Link does that for you. And so that's another thing that you could measure, for example. The number of conversations that you've had. So, maybe you're having an Italki conversation partner and you're going to, just make a mark every time you have one of those. Or maybe it's going to be something maybe that's a little bit harder to measure. And it's going to be like, well, okay, here are the grammar concepts that I am going to learn every single week. And when I kind of invest 5 hours learning this particular grammar concept, I'm going to check it off. And I think something that's really important to kind of mention with regards to language learning is that sometimes it can be very hard to measure things. So, like, is my speaking actually better? How well do I know this grammar? Or do I actually really know these words? In a lot of ways, it's very subjective and it can be very hard and difficult to measure. And I think that in some aspects, people are dissuaded from creating goals because it is so hard to measure. And I would always say, just kind of when all else fails, break it down into a time spent category. That's always something that's measurable. Even though you might not know how well you are or how good you are at grammar, or if your speaking is better, if you track the number of hours that you invest learning grammar or practicing speaking, you have some sort of measurable aspect to things. You can always measure the time investment that you put in. And so, if you're having trouble creating a goal that's measurable, definitely, one way to break it out is just in terms of like a time spent category. It's a great way to do things. But like I said, there's other ones that maybe you don't need to do that, right? With the amount of words that you've learned, that's something that's measurable, for example, or the number of conversations that you've had. And in addition to just having goals that are measurable, I think it's important to keep a historical record, and you'll thank yourself later for that. So rather than just kind of saying to yourself, I'm going to spend 5 hours learning a language every single week and maybe tracking that in a notebook and then throwing that piece of paper away when the week is gone, try to make a cumulative total of all the hours that you've learned in the language or all of the words that you've learned. Try to kind of keep that entire historical record because it's going to help to obviously inform those longer term goals like monthly goals or yearly goals, but it's going to just feel good when you've seen all of the progress that you've had in terms of the hours that you've spent, or the conversations that you've had, and kind of help you to stay motivated and just kind of reinforce that, hey, you are making progress, especially in those times when you might face a plateau or you feel like you're not progressing. You can look back at all those results that you measured and feel good about that, and reinforce the fact that yes, you indeed are making progress. So when you're creating goals, make sure that they're measurable. And if you're struggling with making some of your goals measurable, when all else fails, try to break it down into a time spent category. So next up, we have A for achievable. And this is something that is also really important because I think a lot of people get really motivated, they get really excited to learn a language, and they set very ambitious goals. And the first thing I would stress is try to be very careful of these over ambitious goals because if you have a low achievability, it can really diminish the relevance of those goals. So, for example, some people are really excited about learning a language for the first time, and they say, I'm going to study 40 hours every single week, even though they have a full time job and all these other responsibilities. And the fact of the matter is that if you're constantly missing that weekly target, that daily target, or monthly target, or whatever it is, it becomes okay to miss that goal. And thus, the relevancy of achieving it. It becomes less and less. And ideally, we don't want that. We want something that is achievable, where it's in reach, but we can but it's still like kind of sufficiently difficult, and it's pushing us, right? And that way we can have kind of constant progress. We can have accountability to make sure that we're making steady progress, but we can also just kind of feel rewarded when we do accomplish that goal. And you have to realize too that achievability and this kind of aspect is an art, and it's going to constantly be changing all the time. So different things are going to come up in your life, right? Like you're going to get busy, things are going to come up, and the achievability of reaching targets might change. And so, don't be afraid to have to adjust your targets, when you need to, right? Like if things are way too hectic and you need to lower that goal, then don't be afraid to do that. You can always ramp it up later on. If you are constantly hitting the goal, maybe it's time to ramp it up a little bit and see how that goes. It's just important to constantly just be tweaking things, and just try out different methods and try to set challenging targets too. And like I said, just go with the flow with it because it's going to change over time. It's going to also change when you have more information and you have more knowledge on the attainability of the goal. So for example, I think for a lot of people, they have a goal about language learning. And as they get better at learning a language and they realize what's out there, they have more knowledge on the attainability of that goal, and how easy it is or hard it is to achieve it. And so, when you get that information, always be okay with adjusting the goal with that new information that you find. And I think a few questions to ask yourself are things like, what does this hour commitment mean in the context of my life, right? Really think about um, your targets and like how you're actually going to achieve those goals, right? Like, is 40 hours a week possible with your schedule, right? Or like if you're going to commit to 3 hours every single day, is that acceptable for you? Or do you have to sacrifice a bunch of other things that are very important to you? Try to think about those things because it's going to help you to set very achievable goals. And it's not to say that achievable goals are aiming for kind of it's settling. It's not about that. It's just making sure that we kind of create goals that are going to help us ultimately in the end of the day. Another thing too is like, oh, I'm going to have 5 languages to fluency by the end of the year. Well, maybe that's not very achievable, right? Always be asking yourself, am I being way too ambitious with with the target, right? In a lot of cases, I think some people are way too optimistic, and it's important just to try to set very challenging goals, but attainable goals for the reasons that I mentioned prior. And really, I think that's the key here is try to be very strategic and decisive in your victory on the language versus kind of this reckless optimism where you're going to set yourself up for failure and disappointment versus coming up with a nice strategy, analyzing what time you have available to dedicate to language learning, and then creating goals accordingly. And like I said, you can always ramp up your goals. You can always go above the targets that you set every single week. But I think it's important to kind of set those frameworks up just so that you're not disappointed, you're not discouraged, and there's still relevancy to the goals that you do set. So next up we have R for relevant. And really I think it's just important to know, what is your overall purpose for learning a language? Is it to just get a job that uses that language? Is it for enjoyment? Are you just trying to explore things? It's really important to kind of understand, why you're learning the language that you're learning. And I think it's also important to know, what do you actually need to work on? What will get you to your end state goal, right? Because in the end of the day, we're trying to reach that end state goal, whether that's fluency or a certain skill level, or a certain enjoyment of the language or whatever it is. And so make sure that the goals that you do set are relevant to achieving that end state goal, whether that's I need to acquire more words because my vocabulary is really lacking right now. Maybe it's improving your listening skills so that you can enjoy compelling content in the language that you're learning, whether that's video games, Netflix shows, or whatever. Maybe it means you need to get better at speaking, or you want to get better at speaking. Maybe you really enjoy the speaking aspect of the language process. And so you need to dedicate more time to speaking so that you can kind of enjoy things a lot better. Maybe it's learning grammar concepts because it's something that you've neglected for a really long time. And I think it's very important to just kind of know, are you blindly following strategies or methods that make no sense? I think that some people picked up a language learning method or a language learning idea because someone told them that that was what they were supposed to do, right? Like, don't consume audio content that you don't understand 90% of it. Well, maybe that's not relevant for your current skill level, or maybe that you would get more value and enjoyment out of consuming a little bit more challenging material. Maybe it's deviating from the beginner app that you're using onto something more effective, whether that's an SRS flashcard system or interesting and compelling content. Always be asking yourself, what do I need to focus on right now? What is going to give me the most value right now? Is it acquiring words? Is it improving my listening skills? And in addition to that, how am I going to go about achieving that? What app am I going to use? How am I going to approach this from a study method perspective, or when I'm going to study? I think this is very important to kind of have that relevant aspect of what you really need to work on. And I think kind of a bonus kind of point I would make is that use relevant content for you when learning a language. It doesn't have to be all beginner material or very boring material. If you're going to read in a language, read stuff that you find interesting, whether that's science, politics, or whatever it is. If you don't like watching Netflix shows and people keep recommending you to practice your listening with Netflix shows, but you like playing video games, use video games. That's more relevant for you because you enjoy that. Or, if you don't like a certain method but you like something else, try that method out. I think it's important to use things that are relevant for you in terms of the content that you enjoy, right? Because if you're enjoying the content, whether that's reading material or podcast or whatever it is, you're going to be more interested, you're going to be more motivated, and that's going to help you to learn the language a lot better. So if you're going to use content, use relevant content to you in terms of what is interesting to you, what's fun to you, and what makes the most sense given your current skill level. Don't blindly follow methods because people have told you it's the right thing. Experiment and use ultimately what is relevant for you. And so last up, we have time related. And this is something that I think is also overlooked by a lot of people. And for some people, I think they think it's very stressful having kind of a time limit on achieving certain things. But I think it's very important to try to be specific as you can and set a time frame for when you want to accomplish things rather than kind of just leaving it very open ended to an uncertain period of time in the future. And the thing is, while learning a language never theoretically ends, I do think that it's important to set time frames, on when you're going to achieve goals, because that will help to ultimately inform how much action you need to take on a daily basis, a weekly basis, every single month to get to that goal and get to that goal at a time frame that you ultimately kind of want, right? So, in terms of some examples, I would say things like learn the language for this many hours by the end of this year, right? That's very time related. It has a clear end and it has a clear target of what you need to achieve by a certain period of time. It can also be things like learn this many words by the end of the month, which you could use a flashcard system like Anki or Memorize to measure those words and try to get to that total by the end of the month, the end of the week, or whatever it is. It could even be things that are like, I want to visit the country by the summer of next year. You can even be very specific about that goal, like I'm going to purchase the ticket by April of next year. Create time frames for you achieving those goals, because a lot of times just setting that time limit, setting that time frame can help you to ultimately take the action you need to achieve those goals. Maybe it's something like I will pass the this language exam by a certain date, or I will study my target language for 5 hours weekly, right? Try to set time frames for the achievement of your goals, and I know that it can be tough sometimes, especially if you have a volatile schedule and each week is very uncertain. If that's the case, set time related goals on a longer term basis, in terms of yearly goals or monthly goals, or something like that. I think something else to point out is that a lot of people want to create a goal about fluency by XYZ date. And I have done this before. And I think what you encounter inevitably when you set this goal and then you reach that date is that a lot of people, I think, are very optimistic about, when they'll achieve that fluency target. And at the same time, too, um, you know, uh, in a lot of ways, I think people, it's just a feeling on what fluency means to them. And so you might reach that date that you set for yourself, and you might not just feel that fluent or feel as competent as you wanted to. And I think that it's important to note that you could run into this problem if you set a goal of wanting to reach fluency by a certain time date. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to set targets like fluency. I think it could be very motivating and it could be helpful overall, but it's just important to note that it's going to be a little bit of an art, right? Because your feelings might change as you go about the process, or you realize how much more there is to learn. So it's not to discourage you, but I think it's just something to point out that um, setting a target of fluency by a certain date, might be tricky to set just from the reasons that I mentioned. But, definitely don't be afraid to set it, but just realize the kind of caveats that go with that. And with all that being said, we've kind of gone over all of the 5 categories for the SMART goals framework, which is have goals that are specific, that are measurable, achievable, relevant, and time related. And like I said, I really think that setting goals can be very huge to your overall progress with learning a language. If you haven't done it already, definitely create goals and track them. And if you're going to create goals, try to use something like the SMART goals framework. It's very helpful and it can help you to create very effective goals, which will ultimately help you a lot in the end of the day. And if you already have goals, consider adopting some of the principles that you kind of have found here with the SMART goals framework. And that's pretty much all I had to say on SMART goals. If you like this content, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.